All right. I'm going to be a moderator and a panelist because we lost Athena Health as well as Infobionic today. Or we could just have Lisa and or Ann come back up here because they pretty much could summarize everything. So again, hey everyone, Missy Krasner here yet again. Can't get rid of me quite yet. So the last panel was really sort of talking about, really, is there, what are sort of the areas that are ripe for this kind of medtech and digital health integration? What are some great examples of where that's happening? Lisa mentioned a couple acquisitions and exits on the Covidian side and so forth. I think what we're wanting to talk about, and I'll have you guys introduce yourself in a second, is, okay, so that's all good and well, but what are the monetization and go-to-market strategies, right? How can digital health and medtech together open up new models for going to the market? Who's going to pay? What kind of business models are in place today? How can we, as a group of experts, kind of talk through that? Where does the money flow? How do you get reimbursement? You guys on the medtech space know that that's a rough road to plow, and generally it has to do a lot with clinical trials, FDA, ROI, demonstrated ROI, and so forth. Digital health, it's a little still unknown. So I think you guys all know me, you know where I worked and where I'm from, so I will just pass it to my two other panelists to just actually introduce yourself, a little bit of sort of where your expertise lies, where you physically are located today, because I know a lot of people flew out from different areas and will probably want to follow up with you. I had the privilege of being able to talk to a few of you on the phone before, but why don't you just do a quick intro?
Hi, Brittany Bradrick, and I lead the business development efforts for Abbott Diabetes Care. So a very consumer-facing medical device that's very much at the forefront of looking at technology and digital health with a medical device. Before that, I was in investment banking for a very long time, and I live in the Bay Area.
Morning, everyone. Nicole Walker. I am one of the investment directors with Baird Capital, which is an arm of Robert W. Baird, the investment bank located in Chicago. I like to summarize myself as a recovering engineer who has moved on to the dark side of financing. So I actually started off as a design engineer with Guyton Corporation, Advanced Cardiovascular Systems, before I became Guyton's. Woo, Guyton. And started my career and really kind of honed my chops in the medical device arena before moving on to marketing roles and ultimately moving into venture and medtech investing and ultimately moving on to Abbott and starting their corporate venture unit on the on the biotech side, and then joined Baird Capital a year ago. So that's my.
Did you guys ever cross paths at all?
Oh yeah.
We've known each other, but we never both worked at
Abbott at the same time, right?
Well, you worked at
In the venture unit, yeah.
She was in Abbott Diabetes Care at one time as well, but we did not cross there.
But we know that the medtech community is so small that you cross or overlap at some point in your career.
That's awesome. I love that you guys both have that history. So let's just summarize a little bit about what we've already heard. We know what there are the ripe areas, right, for medtech and digital health. We know it's remote diagnosis or telehealth, despite the fact that we're still figuring out, cross-state where the reimbursement is per state, and whether or not you have to be in a rural place or not to be able to get fully reimbursed. Remote monitoring, sensors, medication adherence, analytics, patient engagement, and so forth. I think the question that I have to you guys, and we talked a lot about this on the phone, you guys totally educated me, is, so great, there's all these ripe areas. Why hasn't there been more integration to date?
Want me to take that first?
Sure.
So I think the challenge with the integration to date has really been around addressing the technology to the pain point, right? That's always the core question. It sounds on paper like a really great proposition, but the implementation of that and the realization of how you make either a change to the workflow or create an efficiency in either time saved or money saved has been a little bit of a disconnect. Mm-hmm. And so, now being back on the investment side of things, I see a number of opportunities that will talk about making efficiencies in the delivery of care. And in my mind, I kind of make a distinction between the practice of medicine and delivery of care. So in my mind, the practice of medicine is everything that goes on between the physician and their patient, and how that interaction is optimized, as opposed to the delivery of care, which really speaks to more of the processes that are in place and the efficiencies that you can create in that particular silo. So if you're looking just at that and trying to understand how you deliver new technology or new services into that arena, you have multiple customers, you have multiple decision points, and multiple need sets. And each of those groups has a different, not to go back to the engineer, but each of those groups has a different product profile or product spec that they're looking for. So then how do you bring to market a solution that is a one-size-fit-all? And if it's not a one-size-fit-all, and if it requires some customization, what does that business model look like?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you really scale that to something that, for me as an investor, is attractive?
Mm-hmm. You want to answer that?
So I think for me, we talk about kind of digital health, and it's this huge, massive thing.
Yeah.
And so in my tiny little mind, I need to segment it, right? And I think that there are, Lisa, I think I read your blog at one point, it was like, where is the money, right? And that is so key. But if you look, for me, it's kind of like you could segment it into consumer devices, which are the Fitbits, right? They're giving data, but they're not telling you how to do something that changes your care. Medical devices that are just transmitting data. So it's, if you have a blood glucose meter, for example, that has data on the meter, and you have some kind of system that just sends that exact data that is just on there to a cloud, that is a class 1 medical device, because you're not changing the data at all. If you are interpreting the data in any way, the FDA looks at that in a very different way, and that makes it a big challenge. There are a few examples of companies that have gotten reimbursement. PTINR, Holter monitors have gotten reimbursement. There's this whole new area of 30-day readmits. So, you really have to look at, how are you going to get paid? Or is it a cost of doing business? And as someone that has a very consumer-facing medical device, we've been looking at this for 4 years. And I can tell you the solution that we came up with 2 years ago is completely different than the solution that we're now following, because it's very difficult to figure out how you're going to get paid for it, how you're going to get it through the FDA, how's it going to fit with my quality standards. Right. Most tech companies are not ISO 13485.
Right.
So that's,
And I think that goes back to one of the earlier comments from the previous panel of, it's surprising sometimes that the large multinationals don't have a strategy in place. And it's not that they haven't tried for the last 5-10 years. It really is trying to bring in this new technology strategy into a very regulated environment. And how do you do that? So part of it is a mind shift of taking people who could not envision 10 years ago doing banking from their phone, let alone doing, care delivery from their mobile device, to these propositions. But it's the fundamentals of, in a regulated environment, how do you deliver some of these solutions in a way that's responsible to your shareholders and beholden to the quality and regulatory requirements, but still leading the pace around innovation.
Yeah, I'll just a couple comments on that. One, I would say from the digital health side, I look at the Medtech world and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know how to segment this, right? Like, I kind of get digital health, and it seems quite easy to map, but that's because I'm on this side of the fence.
Yeah, I know. I'm on the other side.
Yeah. I look out into you guys, and I'm like, man, is it consumer? Is it surgical? The supply chain is so, like, you mean glucometers? No one charges for that? They just make money off of strips? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me, right?
So imagine being an investor and seeing the entire ocean.
It's very, even if you have got a new diagnostic test, it's a big sea of sort of craziness and the long sales cycles. But I think the reason why, in my world, when I was on the investing side for 2 years, was primarily many of the digital health companies could never be a validated system, right? Meet many of the quality standards that are required in a regulatory environment. I'm at Box now. Box. It's, many of you know the product. It's putting stuff in the cloud so that you can get anywhere access on any device. I have a huge life sciences and med device footprint. I mean, all the big names are Box customers, and they want to use Box in a controlled and validated way, but we would have to jump through like a lot of different hoops. And by the way, the FDA doesn't know how to deal with SaaS and cloud yet.
No.
They're still looking at validation in a 6-month Q&A process, where if you're a software product and you're doing releases, they want to Q&A your releases every 6 months and bundle them so that if they get audited by the FDA, they can handle that. So as a software vendor or someone who's producing code in an agile technology environment, you're releasing every single day. I mean, Lisa's not going to bundle her changes on a 6-month. You're going to have different code bases that you're giving to your customers because you're trying to slow down enough for them to QA you. Right. This is the whole reason why somebody who wants to actually get in fast and be on the life sciences side and do some kind of integration. It's the regulatory path, it's the class 1, class 2, it's all of that stuff that makes it extremely hard for the integration to take place.
But I also want to challenge this room, though. I think that, Brittany brought up the point of you have to be able to segment this market. And there's definitely a consumer-facing side of it, right? That is going to be highly regulated, whether we like it or not. But there's also some basic fundamentals around business process optimization and workflow optimization that sits outside of the regulatory purview. And whether we want to admit it or not, the healthcare vertical has been woefully slow in adopting technology. So many of the advances that fintech or digital marketing have taken on to optimize their overall business, we just haven't done within the healthcare vertical. So if you talk to a number of payer and providers and they talk about their immediate pain points, it's not about getting a patient to be more compliant. It's really looking at what's happening with the Affordable Care Act and saying, okay, how do I streamline my system? How do I build in more efficiencies? Because I'm going from thinking about being a profitable organization to just not losing a ton of money on any given yearly basis. And so what are some of the services and systems and tools that I can put in place to do that? Can you give me an algorithm that will help me understand a patient who is a high flyer in my system? Can I identify them when they come in the door, right? Can I identify someone based on their track record, based on their analytics within their patient profile of being more likely to become septic once they come into the hospital system? And those things are very separate from making or giving someone a wearable sensor and managing them through their chronic condition. And so in my mind, that's the low-hanging fruit in our industry. And while we figure out that, we can pace the FDA to get them potentially to kind of a broader understanding of some of the things that we are looking for is ultimately kind of the kind of utopia solution around our systems.
I'd like to add one thing. So it's something Lisa said, which was tech and timing, and that is so hit home to me because so as a banker that called on a lot of these companies in 2000, and that was like, the big tech wave and everything crashed, right? And why did it crash? Well, I mean, there are a lot of things different now than then. One is that Obama has incentivized people to put EMRs into the doctor's offices. And so without that, none of this would be possible. If doctors don't get off of the paper, right, they can't be a part of the equation. And until they're reimbursed, right, to look at the data, otherwise it's just a liability to them. And so I have no doubt that 10 years from now, we will be in a place where all of this will work. I just think that there are some pain points and where you are in that curve on things need to be put in place in order for it to all kind of align. And it's a bit of a chicken and egg, right? We're moving forward with a digital strategy, and we're kind of going with it's a cost of doing business. If we don't do it, somebody else will do it, and how do we differentiate our product? Now we're choosing which product to do that on because, as Missy said, BGMs we don't get paid for, and CMS reduced reimbursement for strips 72% last year, so that makes that equation even harder.
Well, just to pick up on that, so I'd like to actually, and I'd like to just put out a laundry list of maybe 4 monetization strategies that there's some predicates in the market that are working now, and then I kind of want to talk a little bit and have you guys join in about the merit of each, and you have some experience with one of them. So the first one would be sort of what we'd call the engagement and or market share strategy, right? So it's free, but it's all about trying to push out your brand, particularly if you are a large life sciences company and you've got a couple fantastic brands that you're promoting. It's about engagement, and your metrics are measuring engagement and whatever you would define as an active user. So that's one, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be free, but that's what's one way to go, brand loyalty. The separate is something that you already talked about, Brittany, which is sort of trying to monetize off some of these policy decisions that have come to the market. One would be sort of what we call the never events list via the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services. This is, you can't readmit after 30 days on what now, it used to be 5 diseases, now it's up, congestive, pneumonia, and so forth. And so there's ways in which new tools can get into the marketplace to help prevent those readmits, right? And so you get reimbursed on that because they don't want to pay the penalty. Another would be monetizing data in a de-identified way, or even in a non-de-identified way. Ways that you can figure out how to open up your platform, create an API or an STT kit, have folks build off of it, pay you for the data, and or do other cool things with the data. Last but not least would be what I would call the old school model, which I think is really still big in medtech, and also it's still big in digital health, which is what I would call the sponsored model, right? So a lot of our multinational large life sciences companies want to promote a digital health strategy. They've got a prescription, like what we call prescription therapy, right? It's like, I'm going to give you some kind of medication adherence app, or I'm going to give you some kind of digital health app that's going to educate you on the safety of this particular drug, procedure, what have you. But it's sponsored by somebody. It's sponsored by a payer, it's sponsored by a self-insured employer, or what have you, right? That person's paying for it. It's free to the end user. So how many have I hit on? I know the audience probably has a couple more. Why don't you talk about what you're doing at Abbott and which monetization model you fit into and why you guys went that route? Then we'll open it up to the audience a little bit too.
I think it's probably easier for me to use a different example. So,
Okay.
because we haven't fully implemented ours yet, and I don't want to talk about things I shouldn't be talking about yet. So Dexcom, I don't know how many people are familiar with that company. That company is, they have a continuous glucose monitor. They're in San Diego. They'll have to pay me later for
That commercial.
but they are going full bore into digital, and I think are really kind of blazing the space in the diabetes area. There's companies like Telcare that have a blood glucose meter that have put a cellular chip in it, but that's a very expensive meter that nobody's buying. So Dexcom bought a company, a digital health company, and they're trying to do a stepwise progression with the FDA. So they are developing what they're calling, I think Dexcom Share is what they're calling it. It's basically a hub. So you dock your CGM system into this hub. It sends the data to the cloud. Again, it's not doing any interpretation. It's just sending your data. So that's step one. And then where everybody hopes to go is the smartphone. The smartphone replacing the reader would change the business model and make it all worth it, right? But the FDA needs to buy into that. So it's kind of, they're trying to take this like bite-size, model of trying to go at it with the FDA. Other people are trying to share data just app to app.
Right.
But Dexcom's the company that I can think of that's really kind of blazing the trail as far as the FDA is concerned.
Well, I mean, and there's people in the room. Hopefully there's no Sequoia people in here because they might get up and talk about Telcare and have a different story. But I mean, Gluco, Telcare, EOS, there's a lot of folks in the room that are moving towards a cell phone model as a reader and have some headway on that. Telcare is very specific because they've got
It's dedicated.
It's a dedicated device. Anybody just quickly, anybody have another sort of commentary on free? Just getting something out in the market for free that you know of a company that's doing that now. You might be from a large med device company. Anybody know about that they just want to share before we move on from free? Or talk about the perils of free. No one knows anything about free? I could talk about it forever in the digital health space. Talk about Practice Fusion.
Great.
Okay, Lisa.
Did we cover the benefits of free?
We haven't talked about
we haven't
it.
Talk
talked
about
about
it.
that.
What are
Yeah.
the benefits of
Yeah.
free?
There's-
Tell us. Freemium.
From a digital health.
Could she stand up?
Yeah, stand up, Lisa. Do you need a mic? Yeah.
We think about the benefits of free. particularly because we think of the data being locked in these siloed systems. So, and these services being locked, and health has been a very proprietary, walled garden approach to date. So if you want to draw, so two ways for free. One, if you want to draw that data out, you've got to give to get. It was one of my favorite quotes from a friend of mine who does sex counseling. You got to give to get. So you're going to have to give something. You'll never forget that, will you? But so free is a great tactic to free some things that have been proprietary and release it into the system, particularly with the consumer market. Free. We also think of it as then you can transform all of that services data, anything, you can transform it into monetizable events. That's how we think about it, and that's classically how the tech, the rest of the technology is thought about it. Create a new system, release the old system, and pull new providers. If you're sharing risk of people, if there's a switching cost and you want to lower that cost so they'll come over to you, and you think as a result they'll produce something that then you can monetize, give it away for free all you want. Truly.
Yeah, and then just what's the sort of the analog on the med device or life sciences space? So you probably have negative things to say about free, right?
A good analog is,
Yeah.
I've seen it a lot in pharma, but I haven't really seen it in medtech so much as giving away an app for clinical when you're doing clinical trials.
Yes.
So the patient gets data and education, but really the Trojan horse for the pharma company to be able to recruit better, get more data and more insight into the patient experience. So it's sort of this interesting exchange. And of course, the perils ultimately of giving something away is that you don't make any money that way.
Right.
So you got to figure out how to change that, and how to, particularly for the small companies, to, Lisa and I've talked about this many times about how do you manage, that balance between building a market and running out of cash.
Right.
Right.
Did you
No,
want to
and I think
comment?
that's an important part on the pharma side of the business, because there are a number of aspects of pharma, especially specialty pharma, about, same with diabetes, of being able to attract a customer, retain a customer, so that you don't have the leaky bucket, right? There's a high cost associated with converting someone into biologics for a lot of chronic conditions. And so is there anything that you can do from a software, from a tool, services perspective to acquire those customers, be it in the physician's office or even from a direct to consumer facing perspective, and then once you have acquired them or convinced them to move on to a biologic, stay in the process and maintain in the treatment paradigm. And we have seen more services associated with that, but trying to monetize that is still, it's not free. But the true benefit is going to be ultimately to the pharmaceutical provider of that, or the manufacturer in that process. And so what is the benefit of offering that service, and what can you actually capture out of that?
Yeah, I mean, we have a
service.
ton of experience of freemium and upsells and in digital health, and even in mixed funds like technology. Anne, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I have two comments. One is that from the old days of the .com, that it's very hard to monetize eyeballs, so be careful.
Right.
And a lot of people died. And then the second comment on the pharma side is that they have a challenge, which Medtech also has, which is if they give a free app for a certain disease category there, they cannot tie to their products. Because there's all this regulation about, giving something that incentivizes a physician to prescribe their products, which is a big problem for pharma. And a lot of these pharma companies have a problem on the commercial side, how to deal with that. Because not only do you give it for free, but you give it for free to enable the competition. So it's a big issue on the regulatory side that I think we need some help in Washington, D.C., which, I know you have some contacts there, to kind of clarify
I was in the
things.
Republican administration. They're all gone now, thank God.
Well, maybe the next election.
But one thing I want to just counter to that, and you're seeing it, I mean, if you talk to CellScope or anybody else, it's interesting because you start thinking about if you're an accessory, right? If you're an accessory device, I mean, glucose monitors are commodities now. Why not give the hardware for free so that you're getting the data stream and the companion app down on someone's phone so you're locking them in? So, I mean, it's not just freemium. It could be free hardware, but the regulatory issues are difficult.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is I think you need to talk about prescription therapeutics. Because, when people are trying to go to say, fine, I'll deal with the FDA so that I can go above the noise level, then I can give it away tied to something else. And then there's some really interesting way of monetizing those. So prescription therapeutics is going to be a really soft, very hot area there on the digital side.
But prescription therapeutics have their own business model in the fact that if you can increase adherence even a tiny bit, you make so much money that it's worth it.
No, totally. He's just locking them in on the drug. You have a comment in the back?
Yeah, it's just talking about free. I think in the MedTech, the perfect example is actually CRM, whether it's Medtronic or Boston Sci. So as a mechanism of delivering pacemaker ICDs, they use remote monitoring to manage those patients. So Medtronic was actually the first to monetize remote monitoring. Boston Sci came in and gave it away free as an enablement device. So I certainly am not the expert. I'm sure Medtronic and Boston Sci people are here, but that was one of the first applications in MedTech that really generated a lot of movement.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Missy, I have one
Yeah,
thing.
who's in the back? I
I'm
can't
here.
see you, wherever you are.
Yeah, it's Afsana right here.
Excellent. Hey.
Yeah. So Missy mentioned Practice Fusion, which is an amazing, for all, those of you who don't know, it's a free EHR. They raised their first serious money at huge valuation. Everybody thought the investors had something besides nicotine in their cigarettes. But a few years later, they have 80 million patient records, second or I guess first or second largest de-identified data, patient data. They're now slicing and dicing that data and are selling it to pharma and other constituents. But I want to say something else about free. So who doesn't know Cora? Does anybody know who Cora is? So Cora is a website. It's free. So you go and ask questions you cannot find on Google. So you could say, why did Magic Johnson play such a lousy game in 1989, season blah, blah? And you know, when you Google that, it's a bunch of BS comes up and you may or may not find the answer after an hour. So Quora it's also like Wolfram Alpha, which is another search engine, but the search engine is a database that a couple hundred people make and refresh every day. It's not a web database. So Quora has raised a lot of money. It's for free. And people say, what the heck is the revenue model? They don't advertise. What is the use of that? So a couple of years from now, watch it. What they are doing with all this Q&A, they are slicing and dicing the data because it's free. They have a lot of it. And they're going to sell the company to Google. Why is that important? Is because Google cannot handle subjective and experiential search. These guys are going to have so much data that when they sell that data to Google, when you search why did Magic Johnson play such a lousy game, you will find that in Google. So if whatever you do for free collects data, like Quora or Practice Fusion, if there's a really good data strategy behind it, I think it's a winning game.
I mean, I think that was one of the monetization models as well, is sort of de-identifying data. I'd love for both of you to talk a little bit about that, because I mean, being an investor in Practice Fusion, I'll just thank you for the the comments. But I do have to say that, I mean, IMS has been in that business for a really long time, right? And there are lots of restrictions on secondary uses of data. So is it really? I mean, is it a model that an investor would rely on? I'm not quite sure. Any of you guys want to kind of comment on that?
I mean, from an investor point of view, I think it is a model that we would find highly attractive. It just depends upon which segment you're moving into. When you think about something around data of small practices, right? So dental offices, optometry offices, the data associated with that isn't captured in IMS. And so it's almost a black box of what are those practices? How do they, let's go to dental. What are they prescribing? How are they prescribing? By zip code. How can you get to that data? And that's beneficial from a market research perspective if you're trying to bring new innovation to the market, but it's also highly valuable from the large manufacturers who are trying to push their products into those markets, right? So how can you build systems that are easy to implement into a very fractured system? Because most of those are still mom and pop organization practices. And you can do that really well from a mobile app, something that is ticker-based, that you can pull that data into a centralized environment, but aggregate it in a very similar way that IMS does. So I think it's a great model to have.
What would you say?
I think it depends on the company, right? So Practice Fusion has a lot of data on a lot of different people based on your claims.
Right.
Me as a person in a diabetes, BGM company, what is that data going to give me? It can maybe help me improve my products. It can help me know how my patients, are using the product, but it's not as monetizable as a broader stream. I would also say that Google, Samsung, Apple, why do they care so much about health? They care so much about health because Google says it's one of their top Googled items, right? So they care about all the people that are Googling health. But what they're all trying to do with these health platforms is bring together the integration of the data from all the different apps. And then they want to build algorithms, right, that help you interpret that data. So that's how they're monetizing on the data. So I think absolutely it's a big business model. It just depends on which company you're talking about.
Well, when we talked on the phone earlier, you had sort of brought up, all of us were on the phone, but this might not have been you. Somebody brought up this kind of concept of alert fatigue, noise, liability of data. So when you're selling data, particularly if it's de-identified, I mean, you're really just sort of looking at a trend basis. Even if it's the longer tail, like Practice Fusion, which has very valuable data on longer tail practices, like what I mean, longer tail meaning smaller practices and on the ambulatory side. And that's hard data to get at. It's still, and there's lots and lots of rules in HIPAA around secondary uses of data. So I'm still not totally 100%, as an investor, I wouldn't always bank on a data monetization strategy.
But that's different. I think there's, again, segmenting. So there's data that's kind of this pool of data like IMS that you can dig into, and then there's the data that's being pushed to either the consumer or the clinician. And if it's data that's being pushed to a clinician, I think there is extreme fatigue right now. And if you talk to both payers and providers, they throw their hands up of, you guys keep coming to us with this new technology and this new data, and so what? You're giving me more data points and you're not giving me anything that's actionable to move forward.
And by the way, I'm not getting paid to read it and to act on it, and now I'm liable once I look at it.
Right, so I think that's a very different question from, is it nice to have a repository of some of these subsegments that allow different users to dig into it, like IMS, it's so that you can learn more, as opposed to, okay, now you're going to set up a different silo that pushes that data out and forces you to recognize it in some way. And that's, in my mind, as an investor, the biggest challenge with some of these digital solutions that are more consumer and physician or clinician facing, of now that they have this, if my beeper is going to go off every time someone is potentially going to be septic in the hospital, so what? Are they truly septic?
Yeah.
Are they potentially septic? Or what does that mean in terms of my workflow?
But I think that all goes back to the business model, which is it improving your outcome? Is it improving adherence? Is it increasing my workflow? Is it reducing costs? A doctor wants the data if it's an answer for him. He doesn't just want more data.
Right.
Absolutely. We had a couple of questions come in on the app.
Yeah, so a popular one from the app kind of related to that is, do you see a trend towards disease state management by providers and healthcare systems? And is that more or less monetizable? Where are kind of the barriers to that? Or does it actually make it easier from sort of a patient management standpoint?
I mean, I'll thread that out a little bit for you guys to answer. I mean, really, the only time that you see sort of disease management 2.0 happening on the provider side is when you're in a shared risk model. That's when it becomes extremely interesting. And it's never necessarily at the provider level. It's usually at some kind of case management or, coordinator level, with feedback into the provider, into the physician and clinical staff. I'm not seeing it anywhere else, to be honest. And, I've got companies that in my former life we invested in that are in this space. The ACO market and or bundled payments, shared risk, it's still a very small market.
Yeah.
It's very experimental. The Pioneer grants that CMS invested in have not even paid out yet.
Yes.
So, much like Hype Mania, we're in shared risk mania, and every Tom, Dick, and Harry out in the digital health curve thinks that they're going to build a whole new startup that's going to get paid on this. And I also would argue, not to be like a Debbie Downer, but I also think that the whole sort of, startup that comes in and says, I'm working on the hospital discharge model, and I'm basically going to get paid on eliminating readmits. Good luck with that. That's a very small market, and there's about 40 different vendors that are all trying to attack that at the same time, and they have not made a lot of headway yet.
Yeah.
So it's a very small way. But you guys want to comment on that?
I'd add 2 points. One is disease management didn't do anybody any favors. So
In the 80s and the 90s?
yeah, I think that they used some funky accounting. They used, they didn't really prove out what they set out to prove out. And so it's almost a dirty word if you go talk to a payer and you say disease management. But I do think that with the ACOs, they have tried to put some of the practices in play. It's just really small. I would go back to your tech and timing. I think integrated systems where this is really, it is chronic disease management, absolutely have a place. I just think that they're too early on the curve.
I would say that, absolutely. It's less about disease management for me, and it's more about that particular population and what is needed to treat them in the totality of their condition. And so it's not just about diabetes or heart failure, but how actually those two kind of play in with each other, and how do you build your systems to effectively manage those patients. And if that's the case, then I always tell our team, ACO to me means something entirely different. ACO is my acronym for access and cost and outcome. So is this solution going to increase access to care? Is this solution going to lower the overall cost to the system? And is this solution going to improve outcomes? And if we can't stand on that stool with all of those three legs being viable, then we probably need to wait a minute and see how things play out.
Another app question, real quick, and then we'll go back.
One other one that's interesting, kind of in light of thinking about integrating some of these new digital offerings into the physician practice, is do you think meaningful use from the HITECH Act will extend to or influence the use of digital health?
Okay, I just gotta jump on that one. So first of all, just a little history. I was in the first ONC office when we were writing ledge to actually put in the HITECH Act incentives into doctors and hospitals' hands to be paid through Medicare and Medicaid. The legislation has been incredibly distilled and gotten down to a point where it's very flawed because essentially it's rewarding legacy systems that aren't cloud-based, that aren't modular, and essentially creating a very congested space where there'll be a lot of consolidation. You just saw that from Cerner buying Siemens. We're going to hopefully see more of that in the acute care space. Ambulatory is still unknown because it's still longer tail. I will say this, meaningful use is extremely challenged. What are we at, like 23 billion in payments out or something like that? It's really large, but it's extremely challenged. As you saw, CMS just said that they're delaying meaningful use stage 3 until 2017. Very few have attested on stage 2. So the answer would be a resounding no. That is not going to help this situation. The only thing that meaningful use stage 1 has done is it has put way more EHRs in the hands of the ambulatory docs. The acute care guys were getting there anyways, right? And there's a couple things in stage 1 around view, download, and transmit, and around care transitions that have started getting the industry thinking about you must be able to hand off a clinical summary in a CDA or CCD format to another EHR or to another provider. So this world of interoperability, even though we're in total step-down mode from what the nation was thinking about with actually creating a real internet for healthcare, much like how we have an ATM infrastructure where you can get money at any ATM. You could do that in any healthcare facility, get your records, move them over here. We don't do that, so now we've just done a step down to Project Direct, which is essentially just secure email with certificates. That's sad that that's what we're looking at, and it's extremely hard to even do that because it's not RESTful APIs. It's just you've looked into it. We need an Active Directory. You could do that. You could build that for us, Lisa. Yeah. So so meaningful use is not going to help. It's a total cluster F, and it's going to be and I can say that because I was part of the beginning of it. But it's going to take some time to clean up. And I think it's gotten us as far as it can take us. What I'm looking for is from some of you guys in the room that are at some of these big pharma and life science companies, big brand folks that are looking at new ways to push digital health out into the market. I'm much more excited about that opportunity than I am about what meaningful use can do for us. So over it. Did you want to say something? Yeah.
I think you bring up a great point, and it's probably the biggest challenge I think we have at big companies. So I'm at a large medtech company, and it's been incredibly inspiring to listen to what everyone has to say about this rapid exchange of information and change and what the startups are doing. But when you're inside a big corporation that is fearful of the DOJ and isn't interested in wearing an orange jumpsuit, you have a lot of other challenges to consider. So I think when you look at broadening the MedTech business model with digital, when you're in a large MedTech company, broadening is moving, baby steps still. So I'll give you an example, and I'm interested to hear how people are overcoming this. We know, as just one example in our business, that physician training would unlock utilization, especially in emerging markets. And we've got great penetration in the United States, and if we could just train more physicians in emerging markets, we could rapidly change disease therapy and therapy adoption. But how do we get all these physicians together? Aside from flying them overseas, we could do it digitally. That would be a great way to do it. It's a very simple and easy way to create an exchange of information. But we are a medical technology provider, and we provide the product. So we have a couple of things that are a problem. We now are capturing patient case files, so we have a HIPAA issue. We may be having these physicians chat amongst themselves and talking about adverse events. Now we have a reporting issue. Oh, and by the way, this is a valuable tool, so now we have a kickback issue because we're trying to provide it for free. So how do you unlock some of our barriers to getting more patients into the patient funnel and therapies adopted if we can't even unlock an ability to create exchange of information in a way that regulators and the government don't see as problematic? I don't know. I mean, we're fighting those battles internally and externally every day. We're meeting with our regulators who are appropriately risk averse, and we're watching the DOJ every single day, settle with Bard for $50 million and Medtronic for $10 million for a lot of these same issues. So
It's an excellent point. Yeah, please jump in.
Since I'm no longer at the big company.
Go ahead. Free to talk.
I know. The handcuffs are off. I don't know that all of that can happen through the large multinationals. I honestly don't know that that's the case. And I don't know that that's ever been the case. I think that within our industry, it has been the small startups that have changed the landscape and forced the larger companies to take a look and say, you know what, if we don't jump on that, we're going to lose market share. And that goes back to your question around free and how does free play into this. If free allows me to sell more defibrillators or stents or whatever your device may be, and it allows me to gain market share, then I stand up and take notice of that. And so I think the challenge within the larger organizations is to have an eye on how the landscape is changing and to continuously kind of drive management to be aware of that. But I think the challenge for the room and within the entrepreneurial community is continue to bring that innovation forward. Because I don't know that, when I was within Guyton and Abbott, we had skunk work programs and we had initiatives around driving some of that innovation forward, but it gets lost in the minutia of driving towards the quarterly return as well sometimes, right? So I think it really does have to be more of a grassroots uprising of this is what we can deliver and this is the difference that it makes to healthcare, and whether it's the provider or the payer, this is the impact that they're seeing, and then they will push it back into large.
But Nicole, aren't you seeing, there's a different model that's been cropping up, and I mean, for those of us on the investor side that have done, I mean, look at Merck. So GlaxoSmithKline, like all the multinationals now have either investment arms and or innovation labs.
You can have
so
an investment arm. No, you can have an investment arm. But that's not getting around bureaucracy. I would argue for all of those investment arms, how many of those investments have actually turned into a transaction that's been built into a business unit? There's been a couple.
There's quite a few.
No, very few. There have been a number of investments.
All right, anybody from the audience want to take some polls? So, we're still in a roll-up.
Before we go off to this point, I want to give you some advice, which is there has to be somebody out there that is doing it. Go meet them and ask them how they're doing it. It's probably some small independent startup. Go meet them, get their practices. Maybe you hire them as a consultant. But then you have to integrate it into the company, right? You have to educate people. You have to push against the rules that have already been set. But there is likely some path forward. May not be exactly what you're looking for, but some version of it.
Sorry.
gotta fight the
No,
fight.
that was,
Yeah.
it was great. I mean, I think, you know, innovation is everywhere. It's just being able to actually bring it in and then do change management inside of a large organization. And all large organizations have that problem. But I mean, so I mean, you may be well right. Maybe it's just sort of a storefront. But you know, if you've got all of these sort of multinationals that are creating either innovation labs internally and/or investment arms, and they're actively procuring companies and technologies to do roll-ups, to have other lines of revenue. It might not necessarily be that they're bringing it into a therapeutic line, but they're actually developing another strategy. To me, that has been a very interesting thing from the investment standpoint to watch, because if you can't actually innovate internally, right, because you're highly regulated or you've got divisional issues, then why not just buy a whole bunch of really interesting startups and make them make money for you?
I think that's still part of the proposition. I don't disagree that there's still innovation pockets and there are venture arms, and I think what GSK and Merck are doing and even Amgen is doing around devices are very innovative. But you know, we sit down with them as a team and you have those discussions and everyone's still trying to figure it out. So if someone comes to me and says, how do I make a change, and maybe it's a time continuum change, how do I make a change within the next 12 months, within the next 18 months, within the next 36 months? I think it goes back to what Brittany said of, for the next 12 months, we're going to have to fight and bring the organizations dragging to, this is how our environment is moving. Yeah.
I don't know if that's a
Mood
sign.
lighting.
Are we supposed to stop talking now?
It's a little mood lighting.
I was told we have till 12:30. That seems a little long for this panel, so we can move off the stage if we need to. But do you have a question from the app?
Yeah, there's a few that have been kind of popping up in the same vein here, and it's sort of along the lines. It seems that digital health companies are mostly focused on diagnostics, where a lot of the people in the audience from the Medtech side have been often focused on the treatment side, with a much smaller focus on the diagnostic side. So the question is, how do you incorporate digital into my current business model, or how do you branch out from there? Are there lower regulated ways to get in? Is it an acquisition model like you just mentioned? How do they kind of navigate those waters?
Into a diagnostic or to?
No, just how do you bring digital sort of into a business that may be more heavily focused on the therapeutic side?
Oh.
Like either chronic disease management or
Yeah,
a diagnostic?
There's a question about
Right.
stents, for example.
Broad
Yeah.
question.
I think it depends on what your focus is,
Yeah.
right? So I'll take devil's advocate around something around diabetes, right? So bringing something digital into that realm, in my mind, would have to speak to the compliance question. How do you get someone to better manage their therapies if you're looking at something that's consumer facing, as opposed to if we're talking about, I don't know, rheumatoid arthritis maybe, that maybe focuses more on awareness and side effects. So it really, in my mind, focuses more so on the therapy that you're talking about and what your goal is for that therapy and where the pain point is in either attracting consumers to be more adherent or keeping consumers on their therapy regimen.
I mean, in my world, it's really just sort of two openings. One, you're creating a companion app to something you already have in place, and it's mobile, and it wasn't mobile before. It was desktop and/or part of a very sort of antiquated workflow. So that's one way to get in and add a digital health strategy. The other is to create some kind of machine learning based algorithm that is essentially learning over time and turning whatever data you're collecting into an actionable insight. And that's really the two most opportune pockets for digital health to move into a med tech stream. Do you have another idea, Susan?
Well, yeah, so what if your device doesn't collect data? And you are
Give me an example. What device does not collect data?
Yeah. Hypothetically.
I'm like learning.
Let's say you're selling a drug-eluting stent.
Hypothetically.
Sinuses, sinus surgery.
That's an extremely specific example.
If Absorable goes away, it doesn't collect any data.
Yep.
And aside from like developing some chronic patient disease management app or something like that, like how do I incorporate, or how would that person, if they might be incorporate that into business?
So the answer is with sensors, I think. You're starting to see like MC10, a sensor technology company in Cambridge, build sensors into catheters. So in theory, they could tell what the pressure is in there, when the artery, not maybe in the nasal passage so much, but maybe, when the artery is beginning to occlude again, things like that. We're starting to see sensors in implantable knees and hips that test pressure and alignment and infection. So I think the path there, at least in the short term, is through sensors that aren't just monitoring compliance, because that's more external, but monitoring, is it working right?
Yeah.
You know?
And Arna is in the room. She has a ton of experience with that. I mean, that's a classic example of medication adherence. But, I mean, do you have any commentary on that?
Yeah, I mean, you can't change what you can't measure. So there are companies who are putting medical devices out there and they're not gathering every bit of data.
Yeah, we have a mic. Do you want to just reintroduce yourself for people that may not know you?
Hi, I'm Arna from Proteus Digital Health. My first time at this conference, so it's great to meet lots of new people. Now I lost my.
You can't measure what you can't measure.
Yeah. So look, I mean, the whole thing about these discussions about change and all that, it's like you can't change anything. You can't really get anywhere unless you're actually measuring the things you want to change and giving people the data that they need to affect change. So if you're a medical device company and you're not gathering every single possible piece of data that you can, even if you don't know what you're going to do with it today, you kind of don't deserve to be here in a few years and leverage these new business models, because that's, there is so much that you can do, and we can't possibly know all the things that we're going to be able to do once we have everything put together in the way that Lisa talked about earlier this morning.
Do you want to just say what your company does so that your people know why you're relevant in speaking right now?
No pressure.
So Proteus is adding a layer of information onto the act of taking your medication. So we've developed a technology that enables us to manufacture into medication a tiny little sensor, millimeter by millimeter squared, that's using standard MEMS technology to manufacture, so the cost is less than a cent per medication. And every time you take your medicine, we know that you've taken it, we know what you've taken, where it was manufactured, and we capture a host of physiologic information about how your body's responding. So right now, we have products out there that are just the very tip of the iceberg in terms of how we can bring value, but you can imagine a whole lot more coming down the stream.
And Arna's going to be up here later, but this is a fantastic example of Medtech and digital health working right here. I mean, this is the paradigm, right? It's sensor-based technology, but essentially you've attached something to a pill that travels through your body, and or a pill encasing. You can imagine like 20 different variations of this, and there are a lot of other companies out there that are thinking of other ways. So fantastic, and we'll hear more from her later, but this is the shining example of where the two industries have come together, and you're going to see all kinds of different business models. We have people raising their hand over here.
Yes, Missy, I would like to... Hi, Bettina Experton from Metrics. And I would like to bring a tone of optimism to your remarks about meaningful use. All of what we do...
You can always rely on Bettina to be the optimist.
But for good reason, I'm going to prove it.
Yes, yeah, you do have good reason, I actually have to say.
I absolutely do. So we all rely, for everything we do in this room, we all rely on data flowing between patients and providers. In 2009, 10% of physicians were being digital, they were all paper, and about 15% of hospitals were using EMR. Today, we are at 90% of hospitals using EMR.
88%.
I agree with you, right? Antiquated, legacy system. They are not all practice fusion. So anyway, yes, they are antiquated, but now pretty much that provider world out there is digital. Then meaningful use came along with something very interesting for all of us to know. This view, download, transmit regulation you talked about is about the patient getting their own data. And this ATM model we all dreamed about is happening now with a combination of this regulatory framework, the new HIPAA rule, which gives patients a legal right to electronically access their record, and something called this little blue button, which, wait a minute, is going to be very, very big. I'm circulating a letter to be signed by patient-facing organization, EHR, PHR companies. It's going to hit the ONC. Blue button is going to be the connector via the patient to make the data flow. And when you add on top of this mobile technology, which is what my company does it here, you have your recipe for making it work for all of us here. So wait a minute, meaningful use is being redefined via the patient with view, download, transmit, direct when enabled with mobile technology is a whole different history. It's easy to use. So it works. And with regard to my own company, wait a few months, be millions of end users, which the deal we have struck. So it's working.
Before you sit down, I see a bunch of people asking what Blue Button is. Do you want to explain real quick?
Sure. So Blue Button is an initiative which was launched by the federal government, announced by President Obama in the fall of 2010. And the concept was to give an easy way for Americans to electronically access, download their record from a data source. And so being a federal initiative, it started with the VA, with Medicare, and with the Department of Defense, where you can find on their portal this logo. It's what I wear right there on my lapel, but it's indeed a blue button with a download arrow, and if you click on it, you eventually download something interesting. But that has evolved tremendously. You have 500 organizations which have pledged to Blue Button, from payers to Walgreens, and multiple technology company. And now Blue Button can be this mobile record which aggregate everything on the fly on your own device. You don't need to deal with issue of consent. And then the patient can opt in to contribute that data to the cloud. So that's what Blue Button is about today. And just by chance, but with hard work from a lot of us, the Blue Button standards exactly meet the meaningful use standard. These records, the physician, the hospitals need to share with other providers or with their patient as exactly the same standards, that XML, HL7, CCDA, and one of the transport required is this kind of antiquated direct, but it can be, it has been redefined and used in a different way, such as with mobile. So big initiative.
Yeah, and I'll just say that there's a few luminaries in this space that are completely dedicated to bringing kind of where the government started way ahead, and Humetrics and what Bettina's been doing for a couple years now is sort of, I could literally name 3 companies on my hand that are really sort of carrying the flag to have a much better user experience, taking us into a mobile environment. So it's not to say that meaningful use in Blue Button is entirely, and Project Direct is entirely meaningless, because it's certainly not. It's just when you start thinking about where the market is today and how to monetize, we're still trying to get mass adoption around some of these industry standards and the ways in which they're used cross-platform from EHR to EHR. So if you guys want to learn more about that, you've got one of the experts in the space here who's been at it for quite some time and has a lot of experience with ONC contracts and so forth and winning challenges. So just to actually, we're about ready to sort of close. I know we have until 12:30, but I feel like we've been up here for a little long in the tooth. So just to close, I think did we miss any monetization strategy? We talked about data, monetizing data. We talked about free. We talked about some of the sort of new policy, things that are coming out of CMS around, we've talked about actually buying a device and or the things that go with the device as a like strips and so forth. Sponsored models where a payer or somebody will come in. What have we missed? Lisa, you're raising your hand as a potential model, and Anne has one too. Nothing? Yes? Cash. So direct to consumer, direct to provider, cash, which you have some experience in. Exactly. And that is an interesting piece, particularly with more of the consumer side. That's true. People opt out of insurance all the time to get something that they are not covered. Yep. It's a great example. So direct to consumer and cash, definitely great.
I think the other one, which is risky, but I think could be emerging, is the shared savings. So you make a statement to the payers and says, I'm going to basically allow these patients, most of them are chronic, and I'm going to get the certain milestones, easy one, lose 5% of your body weight, and if I do that, you will pay me. Because we know clinically that if you can achieve these milestones, there's all these benefits. So what's nice about that model, you don't have to show the clinical benefits, which we know medical device can kill us. You just have to show I hit that milestones, because we have published before that if we could ever get the patient to change behavior, and if they do certain things, dropping blood pressure, losing weight, whatever it is, be compliant on their therapeutic sessions there for depression, for example. So this is a model I see as emerging there, where startups can really go very fast and get some early traction with the payers, and some of the providers are going at risk.
So shared savings meaning I'm a young startup and I will only be paid if I can demonstrate savings.
So Omada Health, for example,
Yep.
you know, since there is a ton of money, and for full disclosure, I'm a shareholder, is basically they're going to the payers, and they're getting massive traction right now because they say, okay, I don't want to spend 2 years, do a whole bunch of pilots, you know, all the things we all have suffered. I'm going to basically, you're going to pay me a certain amount of money for every patient.
So it's a per
And
member
I'm going
per
to
month.
keep track of every patient. So we're not doing population, you know, portfolio mix, blah, blah, blah. It says, you know, Anne, Bill, Joseph, and all of that. And after 90 days or whatever the time period they've all agreed, if we hit these milestones, you will pay me, I don't know, $600, $800 per person there. It's very defined. Because we know that clinically, if you can get these people to change behavior, we know the benefits. You don't have to show the benefit as a startup. So those models are very interesting to watch because, you know, they will bypass the whole nightmare of the selling cycle to both the physicians, the providers, which will be, you know, at risk. They're moving into this at-risk model. I mean, it's going to be very risky because most providers have no idea of their cost. Therefore, when they go at risk, which they're being forced right now, not willingly, and somebody comes to them saying, knock, 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 I'm going to enable you some of your most expensive 5% of your patients, 50% of your cost, and I'm going to go at risk, and I know if I can get them to change behavior, you will save money. Guess what they do? Sure, I'm going to try. Yeah. So I think there's this very disruptive business models which is looking at the whole solution of you as a person, not a population, but the specific individuals, and going at risk and getting them to do something in the short term that we know has benefit.
It's a great, great catch. Any closing remarks from our panelists before we step off the stage?
I mean, I think I will just reiterate, I agree with everything that's been said today, and I fully believe that 10 years from now we will be there. I just don't know what now to there looks like.
Very true. Well, great. Thanks, everybody, for the discussion.